The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to John. When Judas had left them, Jesus said, "Now is the Son of Man glorified, and God is glorified in him. If God is glorified in him, God will also glorify him in himself, and God will glorify him at once. My children, I will be with you only a little while longer. I give you a new commandment: love one another. As I have loved you, you also should love one another. This is how all will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another." The Gospel of the Lord. It was a #1 hit when it first came out. The song, "What's Love Got to Do with It?" was from Tina Turner. It was at that time in her life when she was first beginning to separate herself from Ike and Tina Turner. And in the song, she says, "What's love got to do with it? Love is a second-hand emotion." Well, try and tell that to a couple who has lovingly covenanted their marriage and have grown in love since they first fell in love. Try and tell a young couple that is about to get married, and whom we are preparing many of these days, that love is a second-hand emotion. I don't think you're going to get very much positive reaction from those kind of people about the meaning of love. But what is very clear today from the gospel is that Jesus expects love from each one of us. What does the good Lord say to us? He says to us in the Gospel of John, "I give you a new commandment: love one another. As I have loved you, so you should also love one another." Now, regardless of how you parse those lines, I give you a new commandment: love one another. People oftentimes say, "Love one another as I have loved you." Well, they're basically two different sentences. But the point is that Jesus is asking us to love one another. And a lot of that love depends on our understanding of what that love means. Is the love Jesus is talking about the same love that a young couple getting married or a couple that have grown in marriage? Is it the same kind of love that they have for one another? No, simply. It's not that way at all. Does it have the bearings of that kind of love? It certainly could have. But what Jesus is talking about is the love of service. Service to one another. Being aware of one another. Being particularly aware of those who are downtrodden. to love one another in that sense. And Jesus says, love one another. As I have loved you, so you also should love one another. And how did Jesus love people? Jesus loved people by seeing to it that if they were ill, they were healed. He loved people by saying, if they are hungry, feed them. And he fed them. If they are unable to deal with their physical illnesses, take care of them. Jesus' love was always a love of service. And at the Last Supper, when Jesus had given the apostles and disciples the bread and wine that would become his sacrifice for us, he then went about washing their feet, which is a sign again of service. Service to one another. I was amazed a couple of years ago when a couple I had known in Memphis asked me to come back and be the witness at their wedding. And the bride said to me, is there any chance that we could do the same thing at our wedding that is done on Holy Thursday night? Could I wash the feet of my husband? Could he wash my feet? And while I hadn't seen it before or ever done it before, I said, sure, why not? And they did. And it was a beautiful gesture, I believe, of their service to one another, their concern and love for one another. Now, they also had the other kind of love, the other eros, that is a part of their love. But this sign and symbol of Christ's love was a very real sign of their service to one another. And that is the love that Jesus is calling us to these days and calling us to in this gospel. That love is expressed again in the way the apostles Paul and Barnabas go about the journey that they were on. I mean, if you read today's gospel, today's first reading, rather, you might think, well, there's not much there to talk about. I mean, it's all about whichever place they were going to. Well, that's true. There is a lot of, and then they went to, and then they went to, and then they went to, right? And various cities are named that they went to. But what were they doing? They were spreading the message of God's love. They were spreading Jesus' message in all those cities that they visited. And in each case, the apostles were doing a number of things that I think are very important for us to do. And that those things are things like when Paul and Barnabas get to the particular cities they're in, they determine that they will indeed set aside certain people who will become their ministers. In one translation, the one you read today, that was read today, you hear the word elders. And we often hear that word, particularly among our Protestant brothers and sisters, regarding what? Regarding the people who lead the church, the elders. Another word for that is the presbyters. And that, in fact, is the reading that I have. It says in this particular Bible, it says, and they appointed presbyters for the people. What were they doing? They prayed over these presbyters and then appointed them for the benefit of the community. And that's exactly what we do today when we have priestly ordinations. These are presbyters for today. We call them priests, but basically they are the people appointed to take care of those in the church, to be aware of their needs and to help them with the gospel. And what is the other thing that we notice in these readings today? Well, particularly, we notice that Paul and Barnabas, when they get back to Antioch, It made all these places, visited all these places, established churches in all these places, been able to preach the gospel in all these places. What do we notice about all of that? They say to the people, we must suffer in order that the church might grow. We must face hardship in order that the church might grow. It is that hardship, if you want to look at it that way, that becomes the love that is service to the people all around us. And then finally, at the end of today's reading, Paul and Barnabas do what? They report to the people how their missionary journeys have gone and how the gospel has gone out to the Gentiles. In other words, it isn't just God's people, the Jewish people, who are hearing the message of the gospel, but the people beyond those gathered together in the Jewish community. The Gentiles, they were reaching out all over the world, at least the world they knew. And they were preaching the gospel of Jesus, whose chief command is love one another. As I have loved you, you should love each other. And what is that love? That love is the love of service, of being aware of the needs of others all around us. It may be the poor people, our neighbors who live here on Division Street. It may well be the people in your own apartment. Maybe a couple or two is having difficulty in their marriage. Maybe we can reach out to them in service to assist them as they grow. But it's important for us to recognize that the love Jesus calls us to is the love of service, service to one another. And that can be found in many, many different ways, in ways that we have to determine for ourselves. So when we hear that they knew the Christians because of their love for one another, we have to recognize that indeed being Christian is a call to love. And what's love got to do with it? Being a Christian? Just about everything.